When a millionaire ruins a cashier's sneakers with coffee, she forces him to spend the whole day finding the perfect pair. But what they uncover about each other is far more shocking than shoes. Before we begin, leave a comment telling us which city you're watching from. Enjoy the story. The morning sun cast long shadows across downtown's bustling streets as Ethan Cole adjusted his Italian silk tie one final time. His reflection in the glass doors of his empire told the story of success. Tailored suit, platinum Rolex catching the light, and that confident smile that had closed million-dollar deals. At 32, he owned half the city's skyline and commanded respect with a single glance. But today, something felt different. Maybe it was the way his coffee tasted bitter, despite being from the most expensive cafe in town, or how his assistant's voice seemed more urgent than usual through his Bluetooth earpiece. "Mr. Cole, the Japanese investors are expecting the presentation in exactly 43 minutes. Sarah's voice crackled through his expensive headphones. "The merger documents need your signature before—" I know, Ethan muttered, juggling his phone, coffee, and the leather briefcase. His Ferrari's keys dangled from his finger as he speed-walked down Fifth Avenue, weaving between tourists and office workers like he owned the sidewalk, which, technically, he did own a good portion of. The irony wasn't lost on him. Here he was, a man who could buy anything in the world, rushing to a small shoe store because his Italian leather shoes had suffered a casualty during last night's partying and clubbing. A broken heel, something so simple, yet it threatened to derail his perfectly planned morning. Sterling sneakers and more appeared ahead, wedged between a vintage bookstore and a coffee shop that probably made better lattes than his overpriced corporate cafe. The store's modest storefront stood in stark contrast to the gleaming towers surrounding it, its hand-painted sign slightly faded but welcoming. Ethan pushed through the door, bell chiming overhead, while simultaneously answering another call from his legal team. The store smelled of leather, rubber, and something else. Authenticity, maybe? Rows of sneakers lined the walls in every color imaginable, from classic white Converse to limited edition Jordans. "Yes, tell Yamamoto-san that the quarterly projections are conservative," he spoke into his phone, barely noticing his surroundings. "We're looking at 18% growth minimum." Behind the counter stood a young woman arranging shoeboxes with the kind of care usually reserved for fine china. Her long, chestnut hair was pulled back in a messy bun, and she wore a simple green t-shirt with the store's logo. What caught Ethan's attention, when he finally looked up from his phone, were her eyes. They were the color of warm honey, and they were staring at him with barely concealed annoyance. "Excuse me," she said, her voice cutting through his business conversation. "Are you actually here to buy shoes? Or did you mistake this for your personal office?" Ethan paused mid-sentence, caught off guard. People didn't speak to him like that, ever. His employees whispered around him, business partners chose their words carefully, and women usually melted when he flashed his practice smile. "I'll call you back," he told his legal team, pocketing his phone. "Sorry about that. Need to get these resold quickly." He placed his damaged Italian leather shoes on the counter like they were sacred artifacts. The woman, her name tag read Lila, picked up one shoe and examined it with the kind of professional interest that surprised him. Her fingers traced the quality of the leather, testing the flexibility of the sole. "These are beautiful," she admitted. "Beluti, right? Probably $1,500 when you bought them." She set the shoe down gently. "But we don't do repairs here. We're a sneaker store, not a cobbler shop." Ethan was getting annoyed. He was used to problems that money could solve instantly. "Look, I'll pay you double, triple your normal rate. I have a meeting in 30 minutes, and I need customers who actually want to buy sneakers," Lila interrupted, crossing her arms. "The repair shop is 3 blocks down, next to Murphy's Deli. They'll take good care of your fancy shoes." For a moment, they stared at each other across the counter. Ethan felt a strange sensation he hadn't experienced in years, Someone was saying no to him. Not because they wanted more money, not because they were playing hard to get, but because they genuinely didn't care who he was. His phone buzzed again. Sarah's text flashed on the screen. "Where are you?" Investors asking questions. "Fine," he said, grabbing his shoes. "Thanks for nothing." He spun around, coffee cup in one hand, shoes in the other, phone buzzing incessantly. His mind was already racing ahead to damage control. Maybe he could swing by his apartment, grab another pair of shoes, still make the meeting if traffic cooperated. That's when disaster struck. His elbow caught the edge of a display rack, sending him stumbling sideways. The large coffee cup flew from his hand in slow motion, its contents arcing through the air like a caffeinated rainbow. Ethan watched in horror as 20 ounces of premium Colombian blend splashed directly onto Lila's feet. It was completely silent. Even the street noise outside seemed to pause. Lila looked down at her once white sneakers, now decorated with dark brown coffee stains. They weren't expensive shoes, probably $30 at most, but they were clearly her favorites. The canvas was soft with wear, the laces perfectly broken in, the kind of shoes that had walked thousands of miles and held 100 memories. "Oh God," Ethan breathed, his business training finally kicking in. "I am so sorry. Here." He reached for his wallet, pulling out a thick stack of hundreds. "Let me buy you new ones. I'll give you $500, $1,000, whatever you want." Lila's head snapped up, and for a moment Ethan thought she might actually explode. Her cheeks flushed pink, her honey-colored eyes flashing with something between anger and disbelief. "Are you serious right now?" she asked, her voice dangerously quiet. "You waltz in here, treat my store like your personal phone booth, knock over my display, ruin my shoes, and think you can just wave money at the problem until it disappears. I was trying to help." "No, you were trying to make yourself feel better." Lila stepped out from behind the counter, and Ethan noticed she was shorter than he'd thought, maybe 5'4" in her coffee-stained sneakers. "You rich guys are all the same. Something goes wrong, throw money at it. Someone gets hurt, write a check. Problem solved. Conscience clear." Ethan's mouth opened and closed like a fish. This wasn't how these situations usually went. Usually people were grateful for his generous offers, impressed by his wealth, eager to please. I'm not. He took a deep breath, trying to regain his composure. "Look, I made a mistake. I want to fix it. Just tell me how much the shoes cost, and I'll replace them." Lila laughed, but it wasn't a happy sound. "You don't get it, do you? These shoes aren't about money. They're about finding the right fit, the right feel, the right everything." She gestured to the coffee dripping from her laces. "You can't just buy connection, Mr. Cole. Ethan Cole." Something flickered across her face. Recognition, maybe. But it was gone so quickly he might have imagined it. "Well, Mr. Cole," she said, bending down to untie her ruined sneakers. "If you really want to make this right, if you're more than just another rich guy throwing money around, here's your chance to prove it." She kicked off the stained sneakers and tossed them into a nearby trash bin. The gesture was so casual, so dismissive of his offer to replace them with something expensive, that it actually stung. "I challenge you to help me find the perfect pair," she continued, walking barefoot to the wall of sneakers. "Not the most expensive pair, not the flashiest pair, but the perfect pair. For me. Today. All day." Ethan stared at her. "You want me to shop for shoes? With you? All day?" "That's right. You spilled coffee on my shoes, Mr. Cole. The least you can do is help me find new ones. Unless, of course, you'd rather just throw money at me and run back to your important meeting." His phone buzzed again. Then again. He could practically hear Sarah having a panic attack 3 miles away. "I have a crucial investor meeting." "Then go." Lila shrugged, examining a pair of bright blue Nikes. "Prove me right about you. Prove that when things get uncomfortable, when you can't buy your way out, you run." The challenge hung in the air between them like a gauntlet thrown down. Ethan looked at this barefoot woman in her modest store, at the coffee puddle still spreading across the floor, at his phone lighting up with increasingly frantic messages. For 32 years, he'd built his life on being right, being in control, being the man with all the answers. He'd never walked away from a challenge in his life, whether it was closing an impossible deal or climbing Everest on a whim. But this was different. This wasn't about money or power or proving his worth to investors. This was about something he'd forgotten existed, genuine human connection, the kind that couldn't be bought or negotiated. "Fine," he heard himself say, surprising them both. "You're on, but I have no idea what I'm doing." Lila's expression cracked just slightly, revealing the hint of a smile. "Don't worry, Mr. Cole, I'll teach you everything you need to know about finding the perfect pair." As Ethan watched her slip on a pair of store slippers, he had the strangest feeling that she wasn't just talking about shoes. And for the first time in years, the thought of missing a meeting didn't terrify him. It thrilled him. Outside, his phone continued buzzing, the business world demanding his attention. But inside Sterling Sneakers and more, Ethan Cole was about to learn that some things in life couldn't be rushed, couldn't be bought, and definitely couldn't be solved with a credit card. The game was on. The first store Lila dragged him to was everything Ethan hated about shopping: bargain footwear warehouse sprawled across half a city block, its fluorescent lights buzzing overhead like angry insects. The air smelled of synthetic rubber and discount dreams, and everywhere he looked, people were digging through bins of shoes like treasure hunters. "This is where you shop?" Ethan asked, trying not to sound horrified as a toddler ran past him wearing light-up sneakers that played a tinny version of "Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star." "Not usually," Lila admitted, grabbing a shopping basket. "But you said you wanted to help me find the perfect pair. That means we explore every option, not just the ones that match your credit card limit." Ethan checked his phone for the 15th time in 10 minutes. 12 missed calls from Sarah, 4 from his legal team, and 1 very angry text from the head of international relations. The Japanese investors had apparently left the building, taking their $2 billion merger with them. "Problem?" Lila asked, noticing his grimace. "Nothing that can't be fixed," he lied smoothly. In reality, he'd probably just cost his company the biggest deal of the year. His board of directors would have his head on a silver platter by evening. "Good, because I need you focused." She pointed to a wall of sneakers that stretched from floor to ceiling. "We're going to try on every single pair in my size until we find the one that feels right." "Every pair? That's got to be hundreds of shoes." 347 actually. I counted yesterday." Ethan stared at her. "You're joking." "Do I look like I'm joking, Mr. Cole?" She didn't. Her honey-colored eyes held that same determined glint he'd seen when she'd challenged him back at the store. This woman was serious about making him work for his redemption. The first hour was torture. Pure, undiluted torture. Ethan found himself kneeling on dirty linoleum floors, helping Lila try on shoes. Bright pink running shoes with sequins. Neon green high tops with cartoon characters. Black boots covered in fake diamonds that probably violated several fashion laws. "These are interesting," he said diplomatically, watching her model a pair of sneakers that looked like they'd been designed by a rainbow that had exploded in a craft store. "They're hideous," Lila said cheerfully, doing a little spin. "But comfort isn't about looks, is it? How do they feel on my feet?" "I wouldn't know. I'm not wearing them." "Exactly my point." She sat down on a bench and began unlacing the colorful monstrosities. "You've been buying shoes based on price tags and brand names your whole life. I bet you've never actually thought about whether they're comfortable." Ethan shifted uncomfortably. She wasn't wrong. His closet was full of shoes that looked impressive but left his feet aching after long days. He just assumed that was the price of looking professional. "Your turn," Lila announced. "My turn for what?" She pointed to a display of men's sneakers. If you're going to help me find the perfect pair, you need to understand what comfort actually feels like. Go try on those running shoes. I don't need new shoes. You need new perspective. Go. Something in her tone brooked no argument. Ethan found himself walking over to the men's section, feeling like a student being sent to the principal's office. The running shoes she'd pointed to were simple white sneakers with blue stripes. Nothing fancy, nothing expensive, just basic athletic footwear. Size 12? The teenage sales associate asked, appearing beside him with the enthusiasm of someone working on commission. 11.5. Ethan corrected automatically. Are you sure? Your feet look bigger than that. I've worn 11.5 my entire adult life. The kid shrugged and disappeared into the stockroom. 5 minutes later, he returned with a box and a skeptical expression. These are gonna be tight, man. He was right. Ethan could barely squeeze his feet into the shoes. They pinched at the toes and pressed uncomfortably against his heels. But they were the same size he always wore, so he laced them up and stood. How do they feel? Lila asked, appearing beside him with a pair of purple sneakers on her own feet. Fine, Ethan lied, taking a few careful steps. The shoes felt like torture devices disguised as athletic wear. Really? Because you're walking like you've got glass in your socks. She studied his face with the intensity of a detective examining evidence. When's the last time you had your feet measured? I don't need my feet measured, I know my shoe size. Humor me. Before he could protest, she'd flagged down the sales associate and convinced him to bring out one of those metal measuring devices. Ethan felt ridiculous, standing there in his expensive suit with his foot pressed against cold metal, while a teenager with purple hair examined the results. Dude, you're a solid 12, the kid announced. Maybe even 12.5. You've been cramming your feet into shoes that are way too small. That's impossible. I've worn 11.5 for years. And your feet have been screaming for years, Lila said, trading her purple sneakers for a pair of basic white ones. Try the 12s. The difference was incredible. When Ethan slipped his feet into the properly sized running shoes, it felt like his toes could finally breathe. The pressure points disappeared, and for the first time in recent memory, walking didn't feel like a carefully balanced act of endurance. Better? Lila asked, and there was something almost gentle in her voice. Much better, he admitted. I had no idea. Most people don't. We get so used to discomfort that we forget what feeling good actually feels like. She sat down to try on another pair, these ones bright yellow with silver laces. Now let's test the real comfort factor. Which is? Running. Before Ethan could ask what she meant, Lila was jogging down the store's main aisle, her yellow sneakers squeaking against the polished floor. Other customers stopped and stared, but she didn't seem to care. She reached the far end of the store, pivoted and jogged back, her face glowing with exertion and amusement. Your turn, she said, barely breathing hard. I'm not running through a shoe store. Why not? How else will you know if they're comfortable for actual movement? Because I'm a grown man in a business suit, and this is a public place. So, life's too short to worry about what strangers think. She gestured toward the aisle. Besides, you owe me. Remember? You ruined my favorite shoes. Ethan looked around the store. A few people were definitely watching them now, probably wondering why a man who clearly belonged in a boardroom was standing in a discount shoe warehouse wearing mismatched sneakers. His phone buzzed again. Probably another crisis that needed his immediate attention, another fire that only he could put out. For 32 years he'd lived his life according to other people's expectations. Professional. Controlled. Predictable. He'd never done anything spontaneous, never acted without calculating the potential consequences first. Fine, he heard himself say. But if someone posts this on social media, I'm blaming you. The first few steps felt awkward and self-conscious. He was hyper-aware of the other customers, of his expensive suit jacket flapping as he moved, of how ridiculous he must look. But somewhere around the halfway point, something shifted. The shoes felt amazing. His feet, freed from their leather prisons, seemed to come alive against the cushioned soles. By the time he reached the end of the aisle, he was actually enjoying himself. "How do they feel?" Lila called out. "Like clouds," he called back, surprising himself with his honesty. He turned around and jogged back toward her, feeling lighter than he had in years. When he reached her side, she was grinning, the first real, unguarded smile he'd seen from her all day. "See, that wasn't so terrible." "No," he admitted, catching his breath. "It wasn't." They spent the next 2 hours methodically working through section after section of shoes. Lila tried on everything from basic canvas sneakers to high-tech running shoes with more cushioning technology than his car's suspension system. With each pair, she asked Ethan to evaluate them, not based on price or brand, but on how they looked on her feet, how she moved in them, whether they seemed to suit her personality. It was the strangest job interview of his life, except instead of evaluating quarterly reports and profit margins, he was learning to notice the subtle differences between shoe treads and the way different materials flexed as she walked. "These are comfortable," Lila said, modeling a pair of simple gray sneakers. "But they're boring. They don't say anything about who I am." "What do you want them to say?" She considered this seriously, walking in a small circle around their pile of rejected boxes. "That I'm someone who doesn't take herself too seriously. That I like adventures, even small ones. That I believe in taking care of things that matter." She paused, looking down at the gray shoes. "These say, I give up easily." Ethan found himself studying her face as she spoke, noticing things he'd missed during their confrontation at the store. The way she tucked a strand of hair behind her ear when she was thinking, the small scar on her chin that suggested a childhood accident and parents who'd kissed it better, the calluses on her hands that spoke of real work, not just the soft handshakes of his corporate world. "What about these?" He pointed to a pair of vintage-style sneakers in deep blue canvas with white rubber soles. "Classic," she mused, trying them on. "Timeless. They're like the little black dress of sneakers." "Is that good or bad?" "That depends. Do I want to blend in or stand out?" "What do you want?" She looked at him for a long moment, and he had the strange sense that she was asking herself the same question about more than just shoes. "I want to stand out," she said finally, "but not in a way that screams for attention. I want to stand out by being completely, authentically myself." "Then those aren't right either." "No," she agreed, kicking them off. "They're not." By the time they left the warehouse, the sun was getting lower in the sky, and Ethan's phone had stopped buzzing. Either his company had given up on him, or Sarah had finally figured out how to handle the crisis without him. He wasn't sure which possibility bothered him more. They grabbed lunch from a food truck parked outside the next shoe store. Tacos that cost $3 each and tasted better than anything from his usual 5-star restaurants. They sat on a bench in a small park, surrounded by shopping bags and the comfortable exhaustion of a morning well spent. "So," Lila said, taking a bite of her fish taco. "What's your story, Ethan Cole, besides being mysteriously wealthy and having terrible taste in shoe sizes?" "There's not much to tell. I run a company. I make money. I buy things." He paused. "It sounds pretty shallow when I say it out loud. Most lives do when you reduce them to their basic components." She wiped her hands on a napkin. "But what made you want to run a company? What gets you up in the morning?" It was such a simple question, but Ethan found himself struggling to answer it. When had he last thought about what actually motivated him? Beyond the quarterly earnings reports and board meetings. "I guess I like solving problems," he said slowly. "Building something from nothing, creating jobs for people." "That doesn't sound shallow at all." then why does it feel like something's missing? Lila studied his face with those honey-colored eyes, and he had the unsettling feeling that she could see straight through all his defenses. Maybe because you've been so busy building your empire that you forgot to build a life. The observation hit him. Not because it was cruel, but because it was true. When was the last time he'd done something just because it made him happy? When was the last time he'd spent an entire morning focused on one person's needs without calculating what he'd get in return? Your turn, he said, deflecting. What's your story, Lila Carter? I work in a shoe store, and I'm very particular about footwear, she said with a grin that didn't quite reach her eyes. That's about it. Come on, nobody spends 4 hours helping a stranger find shoes just because they're particular about footwear. Maybe I'm just very dedicated to customer service. Or maybe you're testing me for something. Her smile faltered slightly. Maybe I am. What kind of test? The kind that matters. Before he could ask what she meant, she was standing up, gathering their trash and shouldering her purse. Come on, Mr. Cole. We've got 6 more stores to hit before they close. Your education in the art of finding the perfect pair is just getting started. As they walked toward the next shop, Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that Lila was right about the test. But he was beginning to suspect that finding the perfect shoes was only part of what she was really looking for. And for the first time in his adult life, he genuinely wanted to pass. By 3 o'clock, they'd visited 7 stores and tried on what felt like 1,000 pairs of shoes. Ethan's expensive business suit was wrinkled, his perfectly styled hair was slightly mussed, and somewhere along the way, he'd loosened his tie without even realizing it. The transformation from uptight CEO to actual human being was happening one sneaker at a time. They were sitting in Soul Searching, a quirky boutique where every shoe came with a story, and the owner, an elderly woman named Rose, treated each customer like family. Lila was trying on a pair of vintage-inspired sneakers in mint green with hand-painted flowers along the sides. These are beautiful, she murmured, flexing her toes inside the canvas. But they're almost too pretty to wear. That defeats the purpose, Ethan said, surprising himself with how naturally the observation came. A few hours ago, he would have judged shoes solely by their price tag. Now he was actually thinking about function versus aesthetics, comfort versus style. True. Lila stood and took a few experimental steps. The shoes made her posture different, more confident, more graceful. What do you think? Too much? Ethan studied her carefully. The mint green brought out subtle highlights in her hair, and the floral pattern somehow matched her personality. Pretty, but not pretentious. Artistic, but practical. They suit you, he said honestly. But do they feel right? They feel… She paused, walking in a small circle. They feel like possibilities. What kind of possibilities? The kind where you walk somewhere you've never been before and discover something amazing. It was such a simple statement, but something about the way she said it made Ethan's chest tighten. When was the last time he'd walked somewhere new without a specific agenda? When had he last discovered something that couldn't be quantified in a spreadsheet? His phone vibrated insistently in his pocket. He'd been ignoring it for the past hour, but the buzzing was becoming impossible to ignore. Finally, he pulled it out and saw Sarah's name flashing on the screen. I should probably take this, he told Lila apologetically. Sarah, what's… Thank God you answered. His assistant's voice was sharp with panic. Where are you? Do you realize what's happening? Ethan glanced at Lila, who was now examining herself in a full-length mirror, completely absorbed in evaluating the shoes. Rose was showing her different ways to lace them, treating the process like an art form. I'm handling a personal matter, he said quietly, stepping toward the front of the store. A personal matter? Ethan, the Yamamoto deal is falling apart. They've been waiting in the conference room for 4 hours. 4 hours. They're talking about pulling out entirely and going with Henderson Corp instead. The words hit him hard. Henderson Corp was their biggest rival, and the Yamamoto deal represented everything he'd worked toward for the past 2 years. Losing it would be more than a financial disaster. It would be a reputation killer. What did you tell them? That you had a family emergency. I've been tap dancing for hours. But they're getting suspicious. Mr. Yamamoto specifically asked to speak with you about the renewable energy provisions, and I don't know enough about the technical details to... I'll be there in 20 minutes, Ethan said automatically. Thank God. The car is waiting outside your building. I'll tell them you're on your way. Ethan hung up and stared at his phone, his mind racing. 20 minutes to get across town in afternoon traffic. Maybe 15 if he ran to his car and drove like a maniac. He could still salvage this. Still save the deal that would secure his company's future for the next decade. Everything okay? Lila's voice made him look up. She was standing a few feet away, still wearing the mint green shoes, her expression concerned. I have to go, he said, the words feeling strange in his mouth. There's a crisis at work, a major deal that's about to fall through. Oh, something flickered across her face. Disappointment maybe, or resignation. Of course. It's not what you think. This isn't about money or ego. This deal will create 3,000 jobs. It's about renewable energy. About making a real difference in... You don't have to explain yourself to me, Ethan. Her voice was calm, but there was something final about it. You have responsibilities, I understand. But the way she said it suggested she understood more than just his business obligations. She understood that when push came to shove, when he had to choose between his corporate world and this strange, wonderful day they'd shared, he would choose what he'd always chosen. I could come back, he said desperately. After the meeting, we could finish this tomorrow or... No. Lila bent down to unlace the mint green sneakers, her movements slow and deliberate. Some things can't be rescheduled, Ethan. Some opportunities don't wait. What's that supposed to mean? She looked up at him from her crouched position on the floor, and her honey-colored eyes held a sadness that made his stomach clench. It means that when someone shows you who they really are, you should believe them. She slipped off the sneakers and reached for her store slippers. And you're showing me that when it really matters, when you have to choose between being present and being profitable, you'll always choose profit. That's not fair. You don't understand the pressure I'm under, the responsibilities. I understand perfectly. She stood, holding the mint green sneakers like they were something precious that had turned into fool's gold. You're exactly who I thought you were when you walked into my store this morning. Someone who thinks everything can be bought and sold, including other people's time and feelings. The accusation stung because it felt both unfair and uncomfortably accurate. But this wasn't about buying anyone's time. This was about 3,000 people who needed jobs, about renewable energy initiatives that could help save the planet, about obligations that went far beyond his personal desires. You're being ridiculous, he said, frustration bleeding into his voice. This isn't about you. This is about... Exactly. Lila handed the sneakers to Rose, who had been pretending not to eavesdrop from behind the counter. It's not about me. It was never about me. I was just a distraction from your real life. That's not true. Then prove it. The words hung in the air between them like a challenge. Outside, Ethan could hear the distant sound of traffic. The normal rhythm of a city that didn't care about his personal dilemmas. His phone buzzed again. Probably Sarah with another update about the increasingly agitated Japanese investors. I can't just abandon a $2 billion deal, he said quietly. And I can't pretend that doesn't tell me everything I need to know about your priorities. Lila walked toward the store's exit, but she paused with her hand on the door handle. When she turned back to him, her expression had softened slightly. You know what the saddest part is? She said. For a few hours today I thought I might have been wrong about you. I thought maybe you were different from every other rich guy who's ever tried to solve his problems with his checkbook. But you're not different, Ethan. You're exactly what I expected. Lila, wait. But she was already gone, the bell above the door chiming her exit like a funeral dirge. Ethan stood frozen in the middle of the boutique, surrounded by hundreds of shoes, and the lingering scent of her perfume. Rose was watching him with the kind of expression usually reserved for people who just witnessed a car accident. "She's right, you know," the elderly woman said gently. "Excuse me?" "That girl. She's right about you." Rose began gathering up the shoes Lila had tried on throughout the afternoon, handling each pair with the care of someone who understood that objects could hold emotional weight. "I've been watching people choose between love and money for 40 years, young man. Money always seems more important in the moment. This isn't about love. We barely know each other. Love isn't about knowing someone for years. It's about recognizing something real when you see it." Rose placed the last pair of shoes back in their box. "The question is, are you brave enough to choose it when it matters?" Ethan's phone rang again. This time it was his legal team, probably calling to discuss damage control if the Yamamoto deal fell through. He stared at the screen, watching the name flash, feeling the weight of expectations and obligations. Everything in his training, his experience, his carefully constructed adult life told him to answer that phone. To run back to his office to save the deal, to be the responsible CEO that everyone expected him to be. But for the first time in his adult life, a small voice in the back of his mind was asking a different question. What if they were all wrong? What if the most important deal he could make today wasn't with Japanese investors, but with a woman who challenged him to see past his own limitations? What if success wasn't measured in quarterly reports and profit margins, but in moments of genuine connection? What if everything he'd built his life around was just an elaborate way of avoiding the risk of actually living? His finger hovered over the answer button. One tap, and he'd be pulled back into the familiar world of conference rooms and power plays. One tap, and this strange, wonderful, terrifying day would become just a story he told at cocktail parties about the time he almost did something spontaneous. Or he could let it ring. The phone stopped buzzing. In the silence that followed, Ethan could hear his own heartbeat, loud and insistent in his ears. "Where did she go?" he asked Rose. The elderly woman smiled, and it was the kind of smile that suggested she'd seen this particular miracle before. "She's headed to Washington Park," said something about needing to think. Rose leaned across the counter conspiratorially. "But, if you hurry, you might catch her at the fountain." Ethan was already moving toward the door when his phone started ringing again. This time he didn't even look at the screen. He simply turned the phone off and slipped it into his jacket pocket. "Thank you," he called back to Rose. "Don't thank me yet, young man. Now you have to figure out what to say when you find her." The afternoon sun was starting to sink toward the horizon as Ethan ran through the city streets, his expensive Italian shoes slapping against the concrete. People stared as he passed, a man in a business suit running like his life depended on it, his tie streaming behind him like a banner of surrender. He'd spent his entire adult life making calculated decisions, weighing risks and benefits, choosing the safe path that led to predictable rewards. But as he ran toward Washington Park and the woman who'd turned his world upside down in the span of a single day, Ethan realized that some choices couldn't be calculated. Some choices had to be made with your heart, even when your head was screaming that you were making the biggest mistake of your life. The fountain was visible through the trees now, and he could see a figure sitting on its edge, feeding breadcrumbs to a small group of pigeons. Even from a distance he recognized the graceful curve of her shoulders, the way she tucked her hair behind her ear when she was thinking. "Lila." Ethan slowed to a walk, suddenly aware that he had no idea what he was going to say. How do you apologize for being exactly who someone expected you to be? How do you explain that you're ready to be someone different, even when you're not sure who that person is yet? As he approached the fountain, Lila looked up. Her eyes widened in surprise, then narrowed in suspicion. Shouldn't you be in a boardroom somewhere, saving the world through corporate synergy? Probably, Ethan admitted, sitting down beside her without invitation. But I realized something. What's that? He looked at her profile, at the way the late afternoon sun caught the gold flecks in her eyes, at the stubborn set of her chin that suggested she wasn't going to make this easy for him. I realized that I've been measuring my worth by all the wrong things, he said quietly. And I realized that losing a business deal might hurt my bank account, but losing you would hurt something I can't afford to lose. And what's that? The chance to become the person I could be, instead of just the person I've always been. Lila turned to face him fully. Pretty words, Ethan. But words are easy. Actions are what matter. Then let me show you. He pulled his phone from his jacket pocket and held it out to her. Take this. Why? Because I don't trust myself not to answer it. And today isn't about my company or my responsibilities or my reputation. Today is about keeping a promise to help you find the perfect pair. Lila stared at the expensive phone like it was a live snake. You're asking me to hold your phone hostage. I'm asking you to help me stay present, to help me choose what matters. Slowly, almost hesitantly, she took the phone from his hand. The moment their fingers touched, Ethan felt something pass between them. Not just attraction, but recognition. The recognition of two people who'd spent their lives wearing masks, finally seeing each other clearly. There's one more store I want to try, Lila said softly. But it closes at 6. Ethan glanced at the sun, which was definitely getting lower in the sky. Then we better hurry. As they stood up together, scattering the pigeons, Ethan caught a glimpse of his reflection in the fountain's water. The man staring back at him looked rumpled and uncertain, and more alive than he'd felt in years. For the first time in his adult life, he had no idea what tomorrow would bring. The Yamamoto deal was probably lost, his board would be furious, and his carefully ordered world was dissolving around him. And he'd never been happier. The final store on Lila's list was tucked away in the arts district, squeezed between a vintage record shop and a gallery showcasing local painters. Cobbler's Dream looked like it had been frozen in time somewhere around 1952. Wooden floors that creaked with character, hand-painted signs, and the kind of authentic charm that couldn't be manufactured or bought. This place is... Ethan paused, searching for the right word as they stepped inside. Different, Lila suggested, watching his reaction carefully. Perfect, he said, and meant it. The store felt real in a way that the gleaming boutiques in his usual shopping districts never had. Everything here had a story, from the vintage shoe forms displayed as art, to the black and white photographs of cobblers from decades past. Welcome to my favorite place in the city, Lila said, her voice soft with affection. The owner, Marcus, has been making custom shoes here for 30 years. He's an artist, not just a businessman. A man emerged from the back room as if summoned by her words, tall, probably in his 60s, with silver hair and hands that showed decades of careful craftsmanship. His face lit up when he saw Lila. My dear girl, I was wondering when you'd come by again. Marcus embraced her warmly, then turned curious eyes toward Ethan. And who's this well-dressed gentleman? Please tell me you haven't started dating corporate types. Lila glanced at Ethan, and he caught something vulnerable in her expression. He's helping me find new sneakers. Long story. Marcus raised an eyebrow but didn't press. Instead, he gestured toward a display case filled with the most beautiful shoes Ethan had ever seen, not because they were expensive, but because each pair was clearly crafted with love and attention to detail that mass-produced footwear could never match. Let me guess, Marcus said to Lila. You want something that's comfortable enough for long days on your feet, stylish enough to make you feel confident, but not so flashy that it overshadows your personality. You know me too well. I should. I've been watching you sketch shoe designs in my back room for 3 years. Ethan's head snapped up. You sketch shoe designs? A flush crept up Lila's neck. It's just a hobby. Nothing serious. Nothing serious, Marcus laughed. Child, show him the portfolio. Show him what real talent looks like. Marcus, please. I'll show him myself if you won't. The older man disappeared into the back room before Lila could stop him, returning moments later with a large leather portfolio. Young man, prepare to have your mind blown. Despite Lila's protests, Marcus opened the portfolio on his workbench. Ethan leaned forward and felt his breath catch. The sketches were incredible, not just technically skilled, but imaginative and innovative, in ways that made his business mind race with possibilities. There were running shoes that looked like they could actually help you fly, elegant heels that managed to look both sophisticated and comfortable, sneakers with artistic details that would make them conversation pieces. Each design was accompanied by detailed notes about materials, construction techniques, and the inspiration behind the concept. These are amazing, Ethan breathed, flipping through page after page of brilliant designs. Lila, these are absolutely amazing. Have you ever thought about... Don't. Her voice was sharp enough to cut glass. Just don't. Don't what? Don't act like you've discovered some hidden talent that no one else has ever noticed. Don't pretend like you can wave your magic business wand and turn my sketches into some kind of empire. The intensity of her reaction caught him off guard. I wasn't trying to. Yes, you were. That's what people like you do. You see something beautiful and immediately start calculating how to monetize it. People like me? Rich people, powerful people, people who think everything exists for their profit. Marcus was watching this exchange with growing concern, clearly regretting his decision to show the portfolio. Perhaps I should put these away. No, Lila said, her voice hollow. Let him see them all. Let him see exactly what dreams look like before they get crushed by reality. She flipped to a section near the back of the portfolio, and Ethan saw that these sketches were different, more polished, more professional, with technical specifications and market analysis notes in the margins. These were my submission portfolio, Lila said quietly. 3 years ago, I spent 8 months perfecting these designs. I researched manufacturing costs, target demographics, retail positioning. I was so naive, I actually thought someone would see the potential. Ethan studied the designs more carefully. They were even more impressive than the casual sketches. Innovative yet practical, artistic yet commercial. These weren't the work of a hobbyist. These were the creations of someone with genuine vision and talent. What happened? He asked, though something cold was beginning to settle in his stomach. I submitted them to 12 different companies. 12. Lila's laugh was bitter. Most didn't even bother to respond. The ones that did sent form letters. Thank you for your interest, but your designs don't fit our current brand direction. Which companies? Does it matter? The result was the same everywhere. No one wanted to take a chance on unknown talent. No one wanted to invest in something that might not guarantee instant profit. But Ethan was studying the submission dates on the sketches, and that cold feeling in his stomach was turning into full-blown nausea. 3 years ago, spring of 2022, right around the time Cole Industries had been expanding into the lifestyle and fashion markets. Lila, he said carefully, which companies specifically? Why? So you can tell me I should have tried harder, that I should have been more persistent. Just tell me. She sighed and began listing names. Henderson Corp., Lifestyle Brands International, Urban Soul, Meridian Fashion Group. She paused, her voice getting quieter. Cole Industries. The portfolio slipped from Ethan's hands, sketches scattering across the workbench like fallen leaves. Marcus rushed to gather them up, muttering about careful handling, but Ethan barely heard him. His mind was racing backward through 3 years of business decisions, trying to remember. Spring 2022. The Lifestyle Division expansion. They'd been flooded with submissions, hundreds of portfolios from hopeful designers, all looking for their big break. He'd been so busy with the overall strategy that he'd delegated the review process to his team, trusting them to identify the most promising candidates. "Oh God," he whispered. "What?" Lila was staring at him with growing alarm. "Ethan, what's wrong? You look like you've seen a ghost." "I need to make a phone call." "I thought you gave me your phone." "I need it back, please." Something in his tone must have convinced her. She pulled his phone from her purse and handed it over, watching as he dialed with shaking fingers. "Sarah, it's me. I need you to pull some files from 2022. No, I don't care about the Yamamoto situation right now. This is more important." "More important?" Lila echoed. "What could possibly be more important than your billion-dollar deal?" Ethan held up a finger, listening as Sarah transferred him to the archives department. While he waited, he looked at Lila, really looked at her. The determined set of her jaw, the way she'd challenged him all day, the fire in her eyes when she'd talked about authenticity and taking chances. He'd seen that fire before. In boardrooms when he was making decisions that would affect thousands of people's lives. The difference was, his fire was fueled by ambition and profit. Hers was fueled by genuine passion for creating something beautiful. "Yes, I'm here," he said into the phone. "I need you to find a submission from spring 2022. Designer name Lila Carter. Carter. Yes, I'll hold." "What are you doing?" Lila demanded, finding out the truth. The wait felt endless. Marcus had finished gathering the scattered sketches and was pretending to organize his workbench, but Ethan could feel him listening to every word. Lila was standing with her arms crossed, her expression cycling between confusion and growing dread. "You found it?" Ethan's voice was barely above a whisper. "Read me the review notes. No, read them exactly as they're written." As Sarah's voice came through the phone, Ethan felt his world tilt on its axis. The review was brief, dismissive, and signed with his own initials, though he had no memory of ever seeing Lila's portfolio. Designs show technical skill but lack commercial viability. Artistic vision doesn't align with current market trends. Too unconventional for mainstream appeal. Recommend rejection. EC, thank you Sarah, that's all I needed. Ethan hung up the phone and looked at Lila, who was staring at him with dawning comprehension. "You," she said, her voice barely audible. "It was you. Lila, I can explain. You rejected my designs. You're the one who," she stumbled backward, her face draining of color. "You're the reason I gave up. I didn't personally review them. I had a team. With your initials on the rejection, your company, your decision." Her voice was getting stronger, fueled by 3 years of buried pain and disappointment. "Do you have any idea what that did to me? Do you know how long it took me to work up the courage to submit those designs in the first place?" Ethan reached toward her, but she recoiled as if his touch would burn her. "I was 25 years old," she continued, tears beginning to stream down her face. "I'd saved up for months to get professional copies made. I'd practiced my presentation pitch in the mirror until I had it memorized. I actually thought someone would see what I saw in those designs. Lila, please let me, and you dismissed them without even looking. Lacks commercial viability, too unconventional. You probably spent 30 seconds on 3 years of my work." The worst part was, she was probably right. He could barely remember that expansion period. It had been all about market penetration and quick wins. Innovation had taken a back seat to proven formulas and safe bets. "That's not who I am anymore," he said desperately, isn't it? She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, but more tears kept coming. Today, when you had to choose between me and your precious business deal, what did you almost do? You were ready to walk away, just like you walked away from my dreams 3 years ago. But I didn't walk away, I chose you. Only after I shamed you into it. Only after I made it clear that I'd think less of you if you left. Her laugh was hollow, broken. And now I find out that the man I'm starting to trust is the same man who destroyed my confidence 3 years ago. Marcus cleared his throat gently. Perhaps I should close the shop early today. No, Lila said, her voice suddenly steady. I'm leaving. She grabbed her purse and headed for the door, but Ethan caught her arm. Please don't go, not like this, let me explain. Explain what? That you've been playing some cosmic joke on me all day. That the universe has such a twisted sense of humor that it threw me together with the one person who… She shook her head, fresh tears spilling over. I can't do this, Ethan. I can't pretend this is just some coincidence we can laugh about later. What if it's not a coincidence? What if this is the universe giving us both a chance to make things right? Make things right? Her voice cracked. You can't make this right. You can't undo 3 years of self-doubt and broken dreams. You can't take back all the times I wondered if I was just kidding myself about having any talent. Your designs were incredible. They are incredible. My rejection had nothing to do with your talent and everything to do with my narrow vision. Pretty words, Ethan. But they don't change the fact that you had the power to launch my career, and you chose not to use it. She pulled free from his grip and walked to the door. With her hand on the handle, she turned back one final time. You want to know the really tragic part? For a few hours today, I actually believed you might be different. I thought maybe I'd finally met someone who saw past the surface, who valued authenticity over profit margins. She shook her head sadly. But you're exactly who I thought you were when you spilled coffee on my shoes this morning. You're just better at hiding it. The bell chimed as she left, the sound echoing in the sudden silence like a death knell. Ethan stood frozen, staring at the closed door, feeling like his chest had been ripped open and his heart exposed to the cold air. Well, Marcus said quietly, that could have gone better. Ethan sank into a nearby chair, his head in his hands. I've ruined everything. Have you? She'll never forgive me for this. How could she? I'm the villain in her story. Marcus walked over to the scattered sketches, gathering them with the reverence of someone who recognized true artistry. You know, I've been making shoes for 30 years. I've seen a lot of talented people come through that door. Most of them give up at the first rejection. Your point? My point is that Lila didn't give up. She kept sketching, kept dreaming, kept believing in her vision even after your company crushed her hopes. That takes a special kind of strength. Which makes what I did even worse. Or, Marcus said thoughtfully, it makes what you could do even more important. Ethan looked up. What do you mean? You said she's incredibly talented. You said her designs were amazing. Well, you're in a position to do something about that now. She'll never work with me, not after this. Maybe not with you, but what about for herself? Marcus walked to his workstation and pulled out a business card, handing it to Ethan. It was elegant and simple with gold lettering that read, L. Carter Designs Where Dreams Take Shape. I had these made for her last year, Marcus explained. She didn't know. I thought someday she might be ready to believe in herself again. Ethan stared at the card, an idea beginning to form in his mind. It was crazy, possibly impossible, and would require him to risk everything he'd built. But looking at Lila's beautiful designs scattered across the workbench, thinking about the pain in her voice when she talked about her crushed dreams, he realized that some risks were worth taking. Marcus, he said slowly, how long would it take to make a custom pair of sneakers from one of her designs? The older man smiled, and it was the kind of smile that suggested he'd been hoping someone would ask that question for a very long time. For the right cause? I could have them ready by tomorrow evening. Ethan picked up one of Lila's sketches, a design for sneakers that looked like they'd been painted with watercolors, beautiful and unique and absolutely perfect. Then let's make some magic happen. The next morning, Ethan Cole did something he hadn't done in 15 years. He called in sick to work. Not because he was ill, but because he had something more important to do than attend board meetings and manage corporate crises. He had a life to rebuild, starting with the trust of one very angry shoe store clerk. Sterling sneakers and more looked different in the morning light. Less welcoming somehow, as if the building itself knew what had happened between its walls the day before. Through the front window, Ethan could see Lila arranging inventory with mechanical precision, her movements sharp and efficient. She was wearing simple black jeans and a gray t-shirt, her hair pulled back in a tight ponytail that seemed designed to keep the world at arm's length. He took a deep breath and pushed through the door. The bell's chime made her look up, and when she saw him, her face went through a series of expressions: surprise, anger, and finally, cold resignation. "We're closed," she said flatly, not even bothering to look at him as she continued stacking shoeboxes. "The sign says you're open." "Not to you." Ethan had expected this. He'd spent most of the night lying awake, playing out different scenarios in his mind, trying to find the right words to bridge the chasm that had opened between them. But standing here now, facing the wall of hurt he'd helped build, all his planned speeches seemed inadequate. "Lila, please, just give me 5 minutes." "You've had 3 years, Ethan, you didn't need those 5 minutes then." Her words stung because they were true. But he pressed on, pulling out the business card Marcus had given him, and placing it on the counter between them. "What's this?" she asked, though she didn't touch the card. "Your future, if you want it." Lila finally looked at the card, and her face went pale. "L. Carter Designs? Where did you get this?" "Marcus made them for you. He's been believing in your talent even when you stopped believing in it yourself." "Stop!" She grabbed the card and crumpled it in her fist. "Whatever game you're playing, whatever guilt-driven scheme you've cooked up to make yourself feel better, I'm not interested. This isn't about making me feel better. This is about making something right. You can't make this right by throwing money at it, Ethan. You can't undo what you did by writing me a check or offering me some pity job. I'm not offering you a job, I'm offering you a chance to prove that you were right and I was wrong." That got her attention. She stopped sorting boxes and turned to face him fully, her arms crossed defensively across her chest. "What are you talking about?" "I'm talking about backing your designs. Not through Cole Industries, not as some corporate charity project, but as an independent venture. You keep full creative control, full ownership of your designs. I provide the capital and stay out of your way." Lila stared at him for a long moment, then laughed, but it wasn't a happy sound. "Do you hear yourself? You're still trying to be the hero, still trying to swoop in with your wealth and fix everything. This isn't about money, Ethan. Then what is it about? It's about trust. It's about believing in someone's vision when it doesn't fit into neat little boxes. It's about taking risks on people instead of playing it safe with focus groups and market research." Her voice was getting stronger, more passionate. 3 years ago, you had a chance to be that person. You chose not to be. "You're right, I was a coward 3 years ago. I let my team make decisions based on spreadsheets instead of soul. I let profit margins matter more than potential." He stepped closer to the counter, close enough to see the gold flecks in her honey-colored eyes. "But I can't change what I did then. All I can do is be different now." Pretty words, but actions speak louder than words, I know. Ethan pulled out his phone and showed her the screen. "I quit my job this morning." Lila's mouth fell open. "You what?" "I sent my resignation to the board of directors 20 minutes ago. Effective immediately." He put the phone away, surprised by how liberating the gesture felt. Turns out that when you miss the biggest deal in your company's history to spend the day shopping for shoes, people start questioning your priorities. The Japanese investors pulled out. Henderson Corp got the contract instead. He shrugged, as if losing a $2 billion deal was no big thing. My board was not pleased. Ethan, that's insane. You can't just quit your entire career because of what happened yesterday. Why not? That career was built on making decisions like the one that hurt you. Maybe it's time I built something different. Lila shook her head, confusion and concern warring on her face. You don't even know me. You can't upend your entire life for someone you met yesterday. Can't I? The question hung between them, heavy with implication. Outside, the morning rush hour was picking up. People hurrying to jobs that paid well but might not feed their souls. Living lives that looked successful from the outside but felt empty on the inside. What do you want from me, Ethan? A chance to prove I've changed. A chance to show you that some people can learn from their mistakes. And if I say no, then I'll respect that, but I'll still quit my job because you were right yesterday. I've been measuring my worth by all the wrong things. Lila walked to the front window, staring out at the busy street. When she spoke again, her voice was quieter, more vulnerable. Do you know what the worst part was? After your company rejected my designs, I stopped sketching for 6 months. I couldn't look at a blank page without hearing that voice in my head saying I wasn't good enough, wasn't commercial enough, wasn't worth the risk. Ethan felt something twist in his chest. Lila. I worked at a coffee shop during the day and took night classes in business management, thinking maybe if I understood the industry better, I could create designs that companies would actually want. I tried to make my art fit into someone else's vision of what was profitable. That's not art anymore. That's manufacturing. Exactly. She turned back to him and he saw tears threatening at the corners of her eyes. It took me 2 years to remember that the best designs come from passion, not market research. That's when I started working here, when I started sketching again. Your recent designs are even better than the ones you submitted 3 years ago. Marcus told you about those. He showed me your whole portfolio. Lila, you're not just talented, you're visionary. The world needs what you create. She was quiet for a long moment, considering. Finally, she walked back to the counter and smoothed out the crumpled business card, studying it, as if seeing it for the first time. If I were to consider this crazy idea of yours, what would it look like? However you want it to look. You're the artist. I'm just the guy who knows how to navigate business bureaucracy and has access to startup capital. And what do you get out of it? The chance to be part of something meaningful instead of just profitable. Lila looked at him for a long time, and he could see her turning the idea over in her mind, examining it from every angle like she'd examined shoes the day before. There would be conditions, she said finally. Name them. First, I maintain complete creative control. You don't get to veto designs because they're too unconventional or risky. Agreed. Second, we start small. One design, properly executed, before we even think about expansion. Makes sense. Third. She hesitated, then looked him straight in the eye. You work with me, not above me. You learn this business from the ground up. No shortcuts, no executive privileges. What do you mean? I mean, if you want to be my business partner, you need to understand what goes into creating something beautiful. You need to learn about materials and construction and fit and comfort. You need to understand why the details matter. Ethan thought about his expensive Italian shoes that had never fit properly, about all the things he'd bought without ever understanding their true value. Where do we start? Lila walked to a supply closet in the back of the store and emerged with a battered box full of leather samples, fabric swatches, and rubber sole prototypes. We start with the basics. Sit down. For the next 3 hours, Lila taught Ethan things he'd never imagined he needed to know. The difference between full grain and top grain leather. Why the curve of a sole mattered for arch support. How the wrong stitching technique could create pressure points that would make shoes unwearable after a few hours. She was a patient teacher but a demanding one, making him feel different materials until he could distinguish between them with his eyes closed, explaining the engineering principles behind comfortable footwear with the passion of someone who'd spent years studying her craft. Most people think shoes are just fashion accessories, she said, watching him examine a piece of memory foam, but they're the foundation of everything we do. Bad shoes can ruin your posture, cause back pain, make you dread walking anywhere. Good shoes become invisible, they just let you be yourself. I never thought about it that way, because you've never had to. When you can afford to buy new shoes every time your feet hurt, you don't develop appreciation for craftsmanship. As the afternoon wore on, Ethan found himself genuinely fascinated by the technical aspects of shoe design. There was something satisfying about learning how form followed function, how beauty and practicality could work together instead of competing. More importantly, he was learning about Lila. Watching her explain the intricacies of her craft, seeing her eyes light up when she talked about a particularly elegant solution to a design problem, he began to understand that her rejection hadn't just been about missed business opportunities. It had been about failing to recognize a true artist. "Can I ask you something?" she said during a break in their impromptu lesson. "Anything. Yesterday, when you found out about the rejection, why didn't you just apologize and offer me a job? That would have been the easy solution." Ethan considered the question carefully. Because easy solutions don't usually fix the real problem. You didn't need a job. You needed someone to believe in your vision. And you definitely didn't need another person trying to control your creativity. "And you think being my business partner is different?" "I think being your business partner means getting out of your way and letting your talent shine. My job is to handle the boring stuff. Contracts, manufacturing logistics, distribution channels, so you can focus on creating." Lila smiled, and it was the first genuine smile she'd given him since their confrontation at Marcus's shop. "You know, when you put it like that, it almost sounds reasonable. Does that mean you'll consider it?" "It means I'll think about it." She glanced at the clock on the wall. "But first, there's something I need to tell you. Something I probably should have mentioned yesterday." "What?" Lila took a deep breath, as if steeling herself for a difficult confession. "The reason I was so angry about the rejection, the reason it hurt so much, it wasn't just about my dreams being crushed, it was about timing." "What do you mean?" 3 years ago, when I submitted those designs, I was about to get evicted from my apartment. I had $37 in my bank account and was surviving on ramen noodles and hope. I put everything I had into those submissions because I thought, if just one company said yes, it would change my life. Ethan felt his chest tighten. "Lila!" "When the rejections started coming in, I didn't just lose faith in my designs. I lost my apartment. I had to move back in with my parents for 8 months. She looked down at her hands. "Every time I tried to sketch after that, I could hear my father asking when I was going to get a real job and stop chasing impossible dreams." "I'm so sorry. I'm not telling you this to make you feel guilty. I'm telling you because if we're going to work together, you need to understand that this isn't just about business for me. This is about proving to myself that I was right to keep believing, even when everyone else thought I was crazy." Ethan reached across the counter and gently took her hand. This time she didn't pull away. "Then let's prove them all wrong," he said quietly. "Together?" "Together." As the sun began to set outside Sterling Sneakers and More, casting long shadows across the store floor, Ethan realized that for the first time in his adult life, he was excited about the future, in a way that had nothing to do with profit margins or market dominance. He was excited about creating something beautiful with someone who understood that the best things in life couldn't be bought. They had to be built, one careful step at a time. "So," Lila said, squeezing his hand gently, ready to learn what it really means to find the perfect pair. With you as my teacher, I can't wait. 6 months later, Ethan stood outside Washington Park with a shoebox tucked under his arm, and his heart hammering against his ribs. The autumn air was crisp, painted leaves scattered across the walkways like nature's confetti, and somewhere beyond the trees, he could hear the gentle splash of the fountain where everything had changed between them. The past half year had been a whirlwind of 18-hour days, late-night design sessions, and the kind of creative collaboration he'd never imagined possible. L. Carter Designs had launched with a single sneaker model, the Watercolor Dreams, based on one of Lila's most beautiful sketches. They were handcrafted in small batches, sold exclusively through Marcus's shop, and a carefully curated online presence. The response had been overwhelming. Fashion bloggers called them wearable art. Customers drove hours just to try them on. Most importantly, people who wore them seemed to walk a little taller, smile a little brighter, as if beautiful shoes really could change how you felt about yourself. But today wasn't about business metrics or profit margins. Today was about something much more important. Ethan found Lila exactly where he'd expected, sitting on the fountain's edge, sketching in the leather portfolio that had become her constant companion. She was wearing a pair of their prototype sneakers in soft lavender canvas, her legs tucked beneath her, completely absorbed in her work. She looked up when she heard his footsteps, and the smile that spread across her face made his chest tighten with an emotion he was still learning to name. "You're late," she said, closing her sketchbook. "Traffic," he lied. The truth was, he'd been circling the park for 20 minutes. Working up the courage for what he was about to do. "Liar, you walked here from your apartment, just like you do every Sunday." She patted the space beside her on the fountain's edge. "What's in the box?" "A present. It's not my birthday." It doesn't have to be your birthday for someone to give you something special. Over the past 6 months, their relationship had evolved from wary business partners to genuine friends, to something deeper that neither of them had quite put into words. There had been stolen glances across their shared workshop, hands brushing as they reached for the same design tool, conversations that stretched until dawn about everything and nothing. But they'd been careful, both of them, careful not to rush, not to confuse business success with personal feelings, not to risk the partnership that had become the foundation of both their dreams. "Can I see?" Lila asked, eyeing the box with curious anticipation. "In a minute. First, I have something to tell you." That sounds ominous. It's not. At least, I hope it's not. Ethan took a deep breath, choosing his words carefully. "Do you remember what you said to me 6 months ago? About wanting to stand out by being completely authentically yourself?" "Of course." "Well, I've been thinking about that. About authenticity. About being brave enough to be who you really are, even when it's scary." Lila turned to face him fully, her expression growing more serious. "Ethan, what's going on? I've been hiding something from you." "Not something bad," he added quickly, seeing alarm flash in her eyes. "Something personal." "What kind of personal?" Instead of answering directly, Ethan opened the shoebox and carefully lifted out 2 pairs of sneakers. They were unlike anything in their current product line, simpler, cleaner, but somehow more intimate. The canvas was cream-colored with subtle gold stitching, and along each side, barely visible unless you looked closely, were tiny embroidered words. Lila leaned forward to read them, and her breath caught. On the left shoe of each pair, in delicate script, "Some things can't be bought." On the right shoe, "But they can be built." "Ethan," she whispered, "I commissioned Marcus to make these using your original sketches from 3 years ago. The ones my company rejected." He lifted 1 pair from the box, clearly sized for her smaller feet. "These are yours, the first pair ever made from a Lila Carter original design." Tears were gathering in her eyes as she took the shoes, running her fingers over the careful stitching, the perfect proportions, the little details that made them unmistakably hers. But why 2 pairs? Because I had a crazy thought. Ethan picked up the second pair, larger and clearly meant for him. What if the perfect pair isn't just about finding the right shoes? What if it's about finding the right person to walk beside? The words hung in the air between them, vulnerable and honest and terrifying in their simplicity. Lila stared at him, the shoes cradled in her lap, her expression cycling through surprise, understanding, and something that might have been hope. Are you saying what I think you're saying? I'm saying that 6 months ago, I was a man who measured everything by profit margins and quarterly reports. I thought success meant having the most expensive things, the biggest office, the most impressive title. He reached out tentatively and brushed a strand of hair from her face. You taught me that real success is about creating something beautiful with someone who sees the world the way you do. Ethan. I'm saying that I've fallen in love with you, Lila, not because you're talented, though you are, not because you challenge me, though you do. I've fallen in love with you because when I'm with you, I'm not trying to be anyone other than exactly who I am. A tear rolled down her cheek, but she was smiling, the kind of smile that started small and grew until it lit up her entire face. You know, she said softly, when you spilled coffee on my shoes that first day, I thought you were just another arrogant rich guy who assumed money could solve any problem, wasn't I? Maybe, but you were also someone brave enough to spend an entire day helping a stranger find sneakers, even when it cost you everything you thought mattered. And now I think you might be the most authentic person I know, and also completely crazy for thinking I'd want to be in business with someone I was falling in love with. Ethan's heart stopped. You're falling in love with me too? Past tense, actually. I fell months ago. Probably around the time you quit your job to prove a point to someone you'd known for exactly 1 day. Why didn't you say anything? Same reason you didn't. I was scared. Scared that mixing business and feelings would ruin both. Scared that I was just projecting all my gratitude onto romantic feelings. And now? Now I think some risks are worth taking. She lifted one of the sneakers, examining it in the golden afternoon light. These are perfect, by the way. Exactly what I envisioned 3 years ago. Try them on. Lila slipped off her prototype sneakers and laced up the new pair. They fit perfectly, of course. Marcus was too skilled a craftsman for anything less. She stood and took a few steps, and Ethan could see immediately that these were different. These shoes had been made not just with skill but with love. How do they feel? He asked, putting on his own pair. Like coming home, she said simply. Like everything I went through was worth it to get to this moment. They walked together around the fountain, their matching sneakers silent against the path, their fingers intertwined. Other couples sat on benches and fed ducks. Parents pushed children on nearby swings, and the world continued its everyday magic around them. So, Lila said as they completed their circle and returned to the fountain's edge, what happens now? Now we walk forward together. We build El Carter Designs into something amazing. We create beautiful things that make people feel confident and happy and authentic. And personally? Ethan stopped walking and turned to face her, taking both her hands in his. Personally, I'd like to spend every day for the rest of my life learning new things about you. I want to watch you sketch new designs and see your face when the first samples come back from production. I want to argue with you about heel heights and celebrate when fashion magazines feature our work. That sounds like a pretty good life. There's just one thing missing. What's that? Instead of answering, Ethan pulled a small velvet box from his jacket pocket. Lila's eyes went wide, her free hand flying to cover her mouth. Ethan Cole, she said, laughing and crying at the same time. Are you proposing to me in the same park where you chose me over $1 billion deal? I'm proposing to you in the place where I learned that some things are more valuable than money. Where I discovered that the perfect pair isn't about finding identical matches, It's about finding someone whose differences complement yours perfectly. He dropped to one knee beside the fountain, and every person in the park seemed to pause and watch, sensing that something magical was happening. Lila Carter, will you marry me? Will you be my business partner, my creative collaborator, my fellow adventurer, and the person I get to love for the rest of my life? Yes, she whispered, then louder, yes, yes, 1,000 times yes. As Ethan slipped the ring onto her finger, a simple solitaire surrounded by tiny diamonds arranged like the laces of a sneaker, the small crowd that had gathered burst into spontaneous applause. Lila pulled him to his feet and kissed him, and it tasted like laughter and promises and new beginnings. You know, she said against his lips, when I challenged you to help me find the perfect pair, I never imagined it would take us here. Best challenge I ever accepted. They walked out of the park together as the sun set behind them, their matching sneakers carrying them toward whatever adventures lay ahead. Behind them, the fountain continued to splash quietly, holding the memory of a coffee spill that had changed everything, a choice that had cost them both their old lives and given them something infinitely more valuable in return. After all, some things really couldn't be bought, but they could be built, one step at a time, by two people brave enough to believe that the perfect pair was worth waiting for.